Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we talk about all things good and the pursuit of the adventure of life. I'm Rafe, and I have the distinct pleasure of being with you tonight, and I have a big brain smart head here with me. Before we get there, I want to thank all our listeners. Without you, we're literally talking to the walls, and you guys give us purpose and a reason for being here. Remember, you can always reach us at bufnagle@bufnagle.com. And if you are new to the podcast, welcome. We are glad you are here. Remember to click that little smiley star, we like you button, whatever that is, anything that helps us, please do that on your end. That would be a great thing. And I know it's difficult hitting that button, but you can hit the subscribe, you can hit the smiley star. And if you would, you can even compose some wonderful words or have one of those chat bots make some excellent review for you and submit it to the Apple podcast review thing. And that would really, really help. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming back for the umpteenth time onto Bufnagle the podcast, America's favorite rocket scientist, a world famous gardener, and more importantly, one of my best friends, Bob Luzenski. Bob, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great. And how could I not be doing great with that introduction, especially that last bit? That makes me very happy.
Well, we all have great friends, and you have been a great friend. And I thought it was just, I would just say
vice versa. Yes. Thank you. So I'm happy to be here as always on the Buff and ready to talk whatever we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, we have a couple things. I want to. Two of these are kind of updates, and then the main thing is going to come. The first thing is we are in spring. I was walking today on the infamous Monon Trail here through Indianapolis, and I saw loads and loads of daffodils shouting their little yellow flowers of joy.
I'm so envious.
But I thought of my friend Bob, and I thought, I bet his bulbs are itching, but they have not yet. They're not yet there. Is that true?
They are fairly convinced that spring is just around the corner, which is early for here normally, but this has been anything but a normal winter. And I've got the early daffodils are coming on quite strong. They're 6 or more inches above the ground.
Oh, really? All right.
Oh, yeah. Even the snow we had last week didn't completely cover them and melted off pretty quickly. So yeah, we're getting real close.
And you have more snow coming, I think, a little bit.
Tomorrow. Yeah, actually,
okay.
Today. Yeah, tonight and tomorrow morning.
All right. Well, we're south of the rain line, so I will think of you getting the white stuff. But
yeah, well, hopefully not too much. And at this point in the year, it tends to melt pretty quick.
I lived along I-40, which goes Tennessee and into North Carolina for a long time. And there, spring comes, like the daffodils are up in February all the way through there. And it's just, I had forgotten, and I said this last year at this time, and I say it again now, I just forget that winter can be this long. It hasn't been bad. It's been a very nice winter as far as winters go.
It's been mild.
It's a little cold but no snow. But holy gosh, I'm tired of it. It's like, I thought to myself, this is dumb. This is too cold. And I think poor Zach up there in Minneapolis, they got 5. I looked at his thing the other day. They got 5.5 inches of wintry mix. It was like 5.5 inches of wintry mix.
That's not wintry mixed.
Yeah, so that was nasty. So your bulbs are coming along. They are.
Yeah, they're coming great. I have the benefit of a south-facing front yard, and that really helps with getting the bulbs on their way, especially the ones that are closer to the house. And I actually noticed yesterday the first crocus bloom, and that is early. It's early for us. So.
Right. So, and I forget, I'm sure I asked you this 100 years ago when we talked about this. So after they do all the blooming stuff, and then they just go back to being bulbs or grass, whatever they are, and do you mow them off? Do you
No,
just
I don't. I let them go, and they, the moisture and the nutrients pull back into the bulb, which is
okay?
why I don't mow them down.
Right. Okay. And then, but then at some point you pull them out and you break them apart or something. Is that a thing you
Yeah, I
do?
can. I did that 3 years after I planted the first batch of bulbs, and we're coming to 3 years since I've done the last did that the last time. This fall would be potentially an opportunity to do that again.
And you
Uh,
dig them up in the fall and
yeah, you dig them up and you split them up and you put them back in the ground, and it's
okay,
a chance to rearrange if you want to do that. So
get them all little rows and columns.
yeah,
Get them better
well,
behaved.
some of us are a little more, yes, have a little more organization to our blooms than
you
others.
you
My
will bloom
my
where
my
you are
engine
planted.
my engineering background shows in my arrangement of flower bulbs.
All right, I have got to come see this at some
Yes, you
time.
do. You do.
All right, well, okay, so that's the bulb update, and I knew spring was coming,
Yep.
and so that is, and by the time this show drops, I'm sure they will be in all their colored glory.
And I'm
Um,
looking forward to it as I do every year.
yes. All right. So, and the second thing is we generally love to talk about rockets, and last time we talked, Artemis, I think, was zipping around, going some
It
wacky
is. I
retrograde orbit thing.
if I recall correctly, that was in December. It was after the Artemis 1 had launched on the Space Launch System rocket, and Artemis was about to do a half a lap around the moon in some strange orbit called distant retrograde orbit, which we tried to maybe got into a little bit back in
Yep.
December and aren't going to get into today. But the good news there is that mission completed successfully. They did a briefing on that just yesterday. NASA did,
Wait. How
and
long was it gone?
oh, that's a test now. It was
But
it
so
was
they did a briefing yesterday, and we're in early March now, but it's been
yeah
back a while, right? I mean,
yeah it's been back
okay.
it's been back for a couple months. Well, it takes a little while to analyze the data
Okay.
and
All
then
right.
do a briefing, and they did talk. There was one, not so much an anomaly, but something they didn't expect related to the heat shield. It was still well within the design tolerance. It just didn't line up with their model, and so they're going to be looking at that to see. They want to understand that, obviously, before they fly with humans on board, which Artemis 2 is intended to do exactly that.
But that's going to be a
And
while for that, right? I mean,
they did say that their planning target for Artemis 2 is November of 2024.
okay.
So
All right.
that gives us a date now that they're shooting for.
18 months,
Yeah, give or take,
20. Yeah.
and
Okay.
it may slip into 2025. We'll have to see how that goes, but there's a lot that has to work, and go right to fly crew this time.
And they're going to fly crew, and they're going to put crew on the moon, or just zip
Not this
around.
time. This time they're going to
Oh,
do
okay.
basically just a swing around the moon. They're not even going to enter an orbit around the moon. They're just going to do what they call a free return,
Okay.
and that way they'll head towards the moon. They'll go around once. Well, they'll go around half a time and then come back like a figure eight.
No stopping for gas and snacks.
No gas, no snacks. Yeah, they're not even going to go into orbit. But
Okay.
then the plan is Artemis 3 would do a lunar landing, but that depends on a lot of other development work going right with the lunar lander.
And that
And
lander is
that actually
in
brings us to,
development, or
it is in development, and that relates to the other topic we talked about with the big rockets, which was the SpaceX Starship Super Heavy, of which the NASA selected lunar lander is a variation on the Starship portion of that big rocket.
Right. Okay.
And SpaceX has been making steady progress on getting the first Starship flight ready to go. They did a test not that long ago of a full test of the first stage, the super heavy stage engines on the launch pad. It has 33 engines, and they fired up 31 of them, and there were two that didn't fire up for various reasons. One they shut down before the actual test, and the other one shut down as it was igniting. But those
Well, it's over 90%.
and-
That's an A in most classes.
it was enough to fly. I mean, so they had
Okay.
enough engines where it would have flown. That was at 50% of rated thrust, so it was a pretty solid test. And since that, go ahead.
Wait, 50% of rated thrust, it was still sufficient to make it go where it wanted to go?
Well, no, if they had all the engines. So the good enough to go comment was related to the engines, how many engines work.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. So so it sounds like they could lose 2 and still make it into orbit.
Wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah, and one of the big things they're waiting for still, while they make final preparations, is the FAA license in order to actually conduct the test.
You have to get a license.
Yes, you do. To fly a big rocket, you need to get a license from the FAA.
Like
FAA?
Is this like FAA just like a pilot license?
No. It's each launch has to have a license.
Like, does it go in your wallet? I mean, is it like
no? It's a piece of paper. It's
really,
it's a certificate that says, it was part of the authorized. There was a law passed. I don't remember the details to allow commercial launches in the first place, and to encourage the commercial launch industry, and it involves, and the FAA is responsible for certifying those launches, the rockets for launch, just like they do with aircraft.
Of course they do, but it just struck me as I never thought
it is a regulatory regime that has been in place for a while.
License and registration, please.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, we're hoping to see that sometime the first half of this year, and that'll be exciting as well.
Wow. Okay. So
and maybe when we think that's going to be close, maybe I can come back and we can talk about that.
That is great. So all right. So the rockets are doing what they're supposed to be doing. The bulbs are doing what nature has made them do for hundreds of millions of years or more.
Not in my yard, but
not in your yard.
My yard only since 2018.
And before, a couple thousand years ago, your yard was probably under a mile of ice. Is that?
Probably.
Yeah, okay.
And it was wetlands after that.
Yeah. So. Okay. So, and that brings us to this thing that I initially prompted me to send you the note. Say, hey, come on, let's have a discussion of this thing. Is a little bit more than a year from now, a very exciting celestial event. Can I call it that?
Yes, that's exactly what
we will be partaking in this wonderful celestial event. A solar eclipse will grace North America on the 8th of April 2024, which is a Monday. And my house, Bob, my new house that I'm going to move into in the next several weeks, will experience approximately 3 minutes of totality.
So you're actually in the path.
You bet I am.
Is
well, it's like, that was the question. We were looking at different lots, and I was like,
yes.
Well,
so that was the decider. That was the.
Well, I was looking at some other ones, and it was like, well, this one's in the path of the next eclipse. So, and who knows the next time I'm going to I said that, and the realtor lady and my wife lady
looked at you.
They looked at me and then they just went on as if, okay, let's just keep signing.
So they pretended that they didn't hear what you said.
That happens a lot. That happens.
I'm sure it does. Now I don't do that with you. But
no. You were like, of course.
That's why I'm a good friend. Yes,
that's right. Of course, you got the lot on the path of totality.
Why would you get any other one?
Do you had a choice? Take that one.
Obviously.
So that's happening in April. You're invited, of course. But I will not feel. But I'm not in. I can get to more totality by going about an hour south of me.
Yes.
About 4 minutes. So that would be. So if you want to come, you can come and stay. We'll have some guest places. You can do that. But if the weather's bad,
are you inviting me or are you inviting the audience?
Well, I will make a list. There's a list because there's finite accommodations. There's only so much room. So
should we back up just a little bit and talk about eclipses?
Yeah, let's do that. And I'll start by the really simple things. Is that the moon is between the Earth and the sun, and sometimes the shadow of the moon comes across the Earth and it makes a black spot.
So yes. And so what we're talking about here is a total solar eclipse.
That's a good call.
That's important
Okay.
because you said solar eclipse, and there are different
You
grades
are
of
exactly
solar
right.
eclipse. But a total solar eclipse is a very unique thing, and it's something that you absolutely, if you have the chance, you want to experience.
And I was okay. So about 7 years ago,
6 years. It was 2017.
2017. So it was 7. Well, yes, but we started talking before this, and you were like,
Yes.
you said
Okay.
the same thing to me, and I was like, Bob, back in the sometime when I was living in Kansas City, so it was between like 92 and 96, there was a partial solar eclipse that went across Kansas City. And I remember I was in my office there, right there on, or right off the highway there.
Yeah.
And I remember the eclipse came over or did the thing. And I remember going outside and seeing the shadows of the leaves on the trees made those little.
Yeah, basically each of the leaves made pinhole cameras,
right,
that gave the effect of multiple images of the eclipse on the ground, which is a neat thing.
Which
and
is neat.
You see pictures of it.
But I was like, real, and I love that natural stuff, right? I mean, I'm all into that, as you can tell, but a lot of this on this podcast. But I was, what's the right word? Underwhelmed. I was underwhelmed by the partial eclipse. And then you told me, no. You got to get into totality. And I'm like, well, I'd have to like where we were living for the last one, we were not in the path of totality, but we were like just outside. We were like a couple miles out of totality. And I remember saying to you, like, do we really have, I'll be at like 99 and a half, like, it'll be like almost all there. It's like almost there. Do I really have to go? And you were like, yeah, you got to go. And I was like, I remember we drove to this other place. We found this, we went to this church parking lot where there was nobody there. And they had a little picnic table there and a little park kind of area behind the church. And we hung out there and we saw it. And I tell you that the eclipse comes and you wait, and we chatted and we had a picnic and we watched it and it got closer and closer and closer. And I tell you, when that thing hit, it was, you know what continuity is in mathematics, right? It's like when you're on a function and you're moving along the function, you can say, oh, well, when x is equal to 10, I can see that y is going to be equal to 5. I can see it. You're going down the curve. You think, I'm going to be at 5. I'm almost to 5. But when you get to 10, it's like you're not even close to 5. It's like you're not even in the same realm. You are now in the complex plane. Things are completely different. The eclipse is the most discontinuous natural phenomenon I have ever witnessed. You cannot, if you're at 99%, you cannot imagine. It's like imagine a new color. Or think up a new sound. I mean, it is that different than anything I've ever experienced before. And Bob, you were absolutely 100% correct.
And it's fun to hear you describe that, because that's what I was trying to convey to you before you had that experience. And it really is. There's nothing that I can compare witnessing a total eclipse to that. And I've had the good fortune to be in the path of the moon's shadow 3 times.
So tell me about those, because one of them was in 2017.
Yes. So one of them, yes, the most recent was 2017. But the first time, well, there's the moon shadow and then there's the moon shadow. Okay. And that's what we need. This is what we're talking about. Right. And that's so a total eclipse is a total solar eclipse is when the moon fully covers the disk of the sun in the sky. And you are in the dark central portion of the moon's shadow.
Right.
Okay. And that is the rare thing, because the path of that shadow, at the distance of the moon, that cone that the shadow makes is fairly small by the time it gets here. It's only on the order of 100 or so miles wide,
right.
Depending on the circumstances of the eclipse. So it's not very wide. So it only affects a narrow path along the Earth's surface.
So that's the total piece, but there's stuff on the edges.
Sure. And
that
that's
is
where,
yeah.
if you're off the central portion of the eclipse, if you're off the central shadow of the moon, then what you see is the sun partially covered. And this is where what we were just talking about, it's completely different. It's a completely different experience. And the reason for that is the sun is still only partially covered up, whether it's 10%, whether it's 90%. The part of the sun that's not covered up is still as bright as it always is. And
Right.
it's enough to kind of light up the sky in a way that it's still, you may start to see, as the eclipse becomes closer to 100%, you go from a clear, if you're lucky, you go from a clear blue sky, that's lit by the sun. Then as the eclipse progresses, you start to notice that it seems less bright than it was. The overall light is not as bright, similar but not the same as, the sun goes down, because the sun is still up in the sky, and
Yep.
And the reflections that the sun makes are still quite bright, and it's still, a bright yellow white, not a orangey like it is when the sun's on the horizon. And then as you get closer, you get to like 90%.
And it's still daytime, right? You can still
it's still daytime,
yeah.
But you start to hear effects like, the birds start chirping like it's twilight, and you start to see like the bright planets start to show up. It
starts to feel like a sunset, but like you're right, the colors are wrong.
Yeah,
right?
it's the colors and the reflections are wrong. They're the specular reflections off of shiny things are still quite bright. And then as it becomes a total eclipse, as the moon finally slides over and completely covers the sun's surface, then what happens is it gets noticeably dark, and you see the sun's atmosphere in the sky surrounding. So you have the dark back unlit side of the moon facing you, and then around that is the atmosphere of the sun, which we normally can't see from Earth because it gets washed out. It's not bright enough to see when you have the sun lighting up the sky and turning it blue. The sun starts to look, the sky is dark,
and it was a color I can't describe. It's a new color. It was, Sherwin-Williams, if you can make that paint, then you got something, right? I can't.
Yes.
It's like a purpley, blacky blue thing, but it was something. And the other thing that was interesting to me, like, there's two things that struck me that I never imagined I didn't imagine they would happen. Is, first of all, when the totality was coming, when it was getting there, like you mentioned it, but you didn't fully mention it, that you can hear it coming. Okay, you said you can hear the birds. I could hear people. Like, we were in the city.
Oh,
we were in the city
okay. Yeah, you were around more people.
And we were around more people. And you could hear, and it wasn't like this, dude, us. It was this expression of complete absolute divine wonder about, like, this is a new thing. This is a new thing I've never experienced before. And it's not like a new thing I've never, like, I haven't experienced getting shot, okay? But I can't imagine I'd make that sound then, right?
Yes.
Right? This was like a wondrous, joyful, divine revelation, right? It was inspired every bit of awe, and you could hear that come with the shadow.
That's a really interesting effect.
Yeah, and the shadow hit. So, I mean, that was mind-boggling. The color was something I've never seen before, and you could hear the eclipse coming by its effect on the people, on the
Well,
people that were there.
and that's really interesting because that's not something I've experienced in the 3 eclipses I've seen. And so the first eclipse that I saw was in 1979.
Didn't you say you drove to like Saskatchewan or something?
It was literally the first time I had flown in a commercial airplane. We left Michigan. I was at the Michigan State University at the time, and me and a friend from the dorm and 2 guys from the planetarium I worked at, we all went to see this eclipse. And so it was the first time I had flown in a commercial airline. We went to Canada because the central portion of the eclipse was near, the central path of the eclipse was near a town called Brandon in, I want to say, Manitoba. And so just west of Winnipeg. And so, I mean, it's February. Okay. This is February 26th, 1979. We're out on the plains in Canada, right? In Manitoba.
You 3 other engineering geeks from Michigan State, and how many hardy Canadians?
There was nobody near us.
Nobody.
We actually kind of left the town area where another of our friends was going to watch it just outside the hotel. But we went a little bit north. We were trying to get away from some what we thought were hazy clouds, which we ultimately were never going to outrun because they were too high. So, and it didn't matter anyway. It actually added to the effect. And this is the point I wanted to make: is every one of these experiences is different, and it's why people go to. Once they've
why they go to Manitoba to see.
That's why they go over and over and over again. But so this one was in February. The sun was low in the sky. It was kind of a hazy, clear, and so one of the most striking effects of that eclipse for me, and it was the first time I had seen a total solar eclipse, having seen several partial eclipses, which are not the same thing, as we've discussed. You could see the central shadow of the moon coming towards us in the sky,
in the clouds,
because it was hazy, a little bit hazy. We could actually see the outline of the moon's shadow as it came from the west, the south and the west, and came towards us and got larger. This arc of darkness that got larger and larger in the sky until all of a sudden it went over and we were in totality. And it was the most amazing thing up till that point that I'd ever seen in my life. And I say that because the overall impression I had on that eclipse was it was the first time I felt like I was standing on a planet. It just having all of that line up like that, it just felt like you were part of a celestial body rather than, we're on the earth and we are on the earth and the sky is blue and the snow is white and, but in Manitoba in February.
Right.
But it was just so surreal. It was almost like that opening scene out of 2001: A Space Odyssey, if you've seen that movie.
I saw it a long time ago.
It felt like that.
Yeah.
But it was something, it was so much more, it was more visceral than seeing. It felt like I was on a planet. And it just, and that one was amazing too, because the partial phases, well, and the interesting thing there was that one only lasted about 2 minutes, maybe slightly less than 2 minutes where we were standing.
Were your parents like, wait, you're going to Manitoba for 2 minutes of what? Really?
I don't remember having a conversation with my mom.
Wait, so what? Okay, so at this point, so that was a big travel. Okay, granted, you're in college, yes. and it's a different thing, right? When you're in college, you tend to do things like that, right?
Yes.
But at some point, somebody had to convince you that this 2 minutes would be worth it.
No.
Because you couldn't have known. You couldn't have known.
I have a better story than that. Okay. 1963, it was summer. We were on a vacation trip, the family, and we went on a vacation trip to the west side of Michigan. and we stayed in a little cottage on the lake. Okay, the big lake, Lake Michigan, and we were coming back, and there was a solar eclipse that day, and I can remember that because my mom was so freaked out about us going blind because we were going to look at the eclipse. Which, by the way, the you don't go blind just by seeing sunlight on the when a partial eclipse. You can damage your eyesight if you look directly at the sun during a solar eclipse, but you can damage your eyesight if you look at the sun when there isn't an eclipse.
Right. Okay.
There's like special rays that come out of the sun when there's a solar eclipse. So that was one of those things that has stuck in my mind since I was 5 years old. And the other thing was, I had at that time, and with me in the car and on that vacation, the little pocket golden book of the stars.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you remember that. I don't know if
I know we had pocket golden books. I'm not sure we had the stars, but we had
but the golden books were a great series. There are all these different science and stuff. And I had the one on the stars, and it had a section on solar eclipses, and it had a picture of a total solar eclipse, which I just thought was amazing. And it had, this is the best part, it had a map of the path, on a world map of the paths of the upcoming solar eclipses for the next, I don't know, 20, 30 years, whatever it was. I may still have that book somewhere, but I haven't seen it in years. But 1979 was on there. And I looked at it and said,
wait, so this was 16 years into the future?
I was looking 16 years into the future and saying, that one's in the United States. By that time, I'll be older. I'll be, maybe I'll be in college. I'm going to go to that. 16 years before it happened, I said, I'm going to that. So nobody had to convince me. The golden book of stars had already convinced me.
You already were sold.
5 years old, I knew I was going to that eclipse.
Well, that is the thing. People have said, "Don't look at the eclipse." I was like, the people have always said, "Don't look at the sun without sun special." I was like, how? And I don't know how people can even contemplate looking at the sun. I do that for us. I can't even look at a light bulb without having to turn away.
Okay, I'll comment on that, and then I want to say something about the whole topic. There is that I because of my age, I have a retinal specialist these days, and my retinal specialist, after the eclipse in 2017, said, "You'd be surprised." That was one of one of the things he would say to me a lot is, "You'd be surprised at what people don't notice about their vision being damaged," and looking at the sun, you'd be surprised. So I'm going to go, since he deals with that, on a daily basis, I'm going to take his word for that. But the other thing was, we were in Manitoba, we were in Brandon, we had caught up with, before the eclipse, we had caught up with our other friend who was at the hotel on a separate expedition with a couple of his friends. And we popped in to visit him, and he had the TV on in his room. And, that like an hour before the eclipse, and, it was a commercial break, and the local station is, be safe, stay inside and watch the eclipse
on TV
on our channel, right? And you're going, you've got to be kidding me. You've got people coming from all over the world here to watch the eclipse. And these clowns on TV are telling the local people to stay indoors and not watch a total solar eclipse pass through their town.
Wow.
Words. I have no words. We were just dumbfounded.
Yeah. Well, so you actually went outside and you saw that eclipse.
We did. We went, right. We saw it in the, and that's the one other thing, going back to the topic of everyone is different. Every one of these eclipses is different. So we were in the snow, we were out there in the snow. We were on the side of, I think the Trans-Canada Highway, if I remember correctly. There were trucks going by, as it got darker, they started having their headlights on,
Right.
and I don't remember if people finally stopped. We were kind of surprised, people are just still driving, it's like, that's nuts. They should be pulling over and watching the eclipse.
Watch this thing. It doesn't happen every day, right? Yeah.
No, not every day. But, finally I think the traffic kind of stopped, and as it got really close, so the light levels were really low because most of the sun was covered up, but there was still the part that was still visible was still very bright. And it was glinting off the snowflakes because we were looking down sun, towards the sun, and this, the glint that you get. And you can see that, on a snowy day, anytime that it's sunny. But it was so different as you might imagine, because the overall ambient light level was so low, but the reflections were still so bright. So it was just really neat.
When they show those pictures from the moon, the thing that is always interesting to me is how bright it is. But because there's no atmosphere, everything above the horizon is complete darkness.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
And that's one of those kinds of, like, if the light is not what you expect, you're going to get that thing. All right. So you've seen 3 now.
Yes.
You saw that one in Manitoba. You saw the one that went through Tennessee back in 2017.
There was another one, and that was the 1991 eclipse. And that was that cross started in the Pacific Ocean, happened to cross the big island of Hawaii, then crossed Mexico and went down towards the south and towards the east. That one, I wasn't quite so fortunate as the other 2 because, and I looked this up just before we started the recording, to check my memory from 1991, but about 3 weeks before that eclipse, Mount Pinatubo erupted, and it sent a huge amount of ash up into the upper atmosphere, and it changed the weather. And I had chosen to go to Hawaii, one, because Hawaii, and 2,
2 eclipse.
2, because the weather chances of having a clear sky, having clouds, was only at that time of year in Hawaii on that side of the big island was only 10%, right? So 9 out of 10 chance that the sky was going to be clear, based on past experience.
Your what do they say? Your mileage may vary. Past results are no guarantee of future yields.
Well, you're a statistics guy, and that's why I'm bringing this up.
Yep.
And it relates to the eclipse coming up, and it's the topic of, climate versus weather.
Yeah,
weather is what you get today.
Yep.
Climate is, the sum total of what it's been over time.
But you were telling me that here in Indiana, in April, our chances of a clear sky are what you said, like 30%. Is that what you were saying?
Your chances of clouds are 7 out of 10.
7 out of 10, yeah.
But again, we just had a beautiful sunny day on Wednesday. It was gorgeous, and it was cloudy today, and it's going to snow here tomorrow.
Yeah.
So
well, it was like I said, even today though, we had some high clouds, and I was thinking about that today. It was like, what would be enough to get me, and where would I go? That's my thought.
You go somewhere along the path.
And so, right. Yes, obviously, yeah. but you have to make that decision. That's the thing. You have to make the decision to maximize your chances, but still you can't chase them all, Bob, right? I mean,
so there are rules. There are rules to eclipse watching, and the story I'm telling about seeing the 91 eclipse relates to that. So I was on a tour. There were a bunch of other people. We were at a big, resort on the Kona coast. I watched the eclipse from the hotel grounds, which would have been beautiful, except for the fact that there were low clouds that went partway up the mountain, and we were sucked in. So we had 4.5 minutes of being in the moon shadow and not being able to see these amazing things we've already described after taking that big trip. So it was a pretty big disappointment. Now, I violated one of the top rules, if not rule number 1, of total solar eclipse watching, and that's you got to be mobile.
Right.
I was not mobile. I was trapped where I was. My next door neighbor, who I'd gotten to talk to, and actually was a fairly interesting character involved in the Gamma Ray Observer telescope that had not quite launched at that time. He was also on the same tour. Next door neighbor in the hotel. He had the presence of mind to rent a car. They drove partway up the mountain,
above the cloud
above
line.
the clouds, and they saw the eclipse.
He didn't take you along?
No, he didn't.
Some friend he was, Bob.
I had just met him,
I'm teasing. All right.
So shout out to Brad there, but that Brad.
The other Brad. Well, see, and that's the thing. So I'm trying to figure out as things will get closer, I will develop a plan and I will make a decision based upon on work and travel. Who do I know along the path? How far do I have to go to have the to really have a different climate system? Texas is on the path. So
here's the thing. There's the climate part. You can improve your odds there, but even with a 90-10 favorable, you can still end up clouded out on eclipse day, as I have testified to you. So there's only so much you can do there. So being mobile is important. In the 2017 eclipse, we talked a few days out, and you were gracious enough then to offer. I was leading a party of 4, including my son, my brother, and his youngest son. And the 4 of us were I was the leader because I was the most experienced. I was the only one who'd been to a solar eclipse. The other 3, they were first timers. So they were going to, I was in charge of figuring out how to get us into the moon's shadow so we could see it.
Well,
and go ahead.
Yeah. So we had the same thing. And so that day if I remember right, it started off pretty blue sky, but then small clouds started coming in the afternoon. And where we were there in the parking lot, I was checking the watch with the countdown clock, and you can see the sun and the moon, and you see these small cumulus clouds drifting by.
Well, and they're the kind of thing that pops up.
Yeah, in July.
It was August.
So we're sitting there.
It's the kind of thing that pops up during the day because there's moisture in the ground. The sun warms it up and it goes into the sky and it makes clouds. And that happens during the summer an awful lot. And that was what was expected to happen that day.
And there were people
we were in Tennessee.
There were people there with us that weren't in our group. And they were like, I'm bailing out. And I was like, I think we should bail out. And Michelle was like, I'll be okay. And I was like, no, I don't want to miss this. I don't want to miss this. Bob said, I have to be in totality. And so we were waiting. And I'll bet 8 minutes before this thing was going to hit totality, this cloud came and just sat right over us. And it was a small it's hard to tell how big it was, but it wasn't like it was covering the sky. It was this narrow,
small by fraction of the sky.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, is this going to move? And I'm watching, because normally they kind of drift west to east, right? This thing just sat there. It just sat there and sat there.
The wind had died down.
The wind down. There was no wind. And I thought, we're going to have to move. And I'm trying to think, where am I going to go? So I'm looking at the cloud cover and trying to figure out, should I go south? Is this road going to be blocked? Because people are starting to pull over to the side. And I'm making this plan. And I tell you, about 90 seconds before totality, the breath of God moved the cloud out of the way. And there we were. And we had a full view the entire 3.5 minutes or whatever it was. And I just remember staring up at the sky, and some people were like, here, turn around, I'll take your picture. I was like, I don't want my picture taken.
No, just look at this. Take this in.
Take it all in. Live. And that's the other thing. Don't bother taking your camera. Don't
doesn't do it justice.
You can't have a picture of yes, you were at the eclipse. Just remember it. It'll be good.
We took a picture of the party after we successfully observed the eclipse. But going back to figuring out what you're going to do and where, we were uncertain of exactly where we were going to watch the eclipse from, even after we had decided to go south towards you, rather than west like I had originally had planned.
Okay.
And one of the things because again, I was leading the party, I was responsible for the weather too. I was like, okay, we got to do this. And I looked at the weather, and I've been looking at the weather for a
Weeks.
week.
Yep.
Climate for weeks, and then
weather for
a
days.
week. Yep. You start getting into -6 days, and you start getting actual predictions. And I got to the point where I said, no, we changed our mind with like 3 days left, which direction we were going to go. And it was because the predictions were going to be for that type of cloud, was what it was going to be. And it was, whatever. But what I knew from previous experience and knowledge of eclipses was it was going to get cooler.
When the shadow comes.
As the outer shadow, not the central shadow, the outer shadow, it starts, as the sunlight starts to get reduced, it starts to cool off. And as it starts to cool off, those clouds start to disappear, just like near sunset.
Right.
Okay. And I said, it was one of those where I was like, my mind knows this is true, but lots riding on this.
You sure want to be certain, don't you?
And I kept telling the guys, this is how it's going to be. It's going to be okay. But in my mind, I'm going, oh my gosh, I hope it's going to be okay.
It's going to be all right.
And what happened was, yes, those clouds built up. They built up. And then sure enough, we started getting 15, 20 minutes into the partial phase. And I was like, look, they're
going away.
They're starting to go away. And by the time of the eclipse, we had practically clear skies.
Well, okay. So this fourth topic, we're going to have to leave. We will leave the fourth topic for the next time you're on, Bob, because I do want to discuss this because it's interesting, but we are out of time. And I kept watching the clock early on. I was like, well, I think we'll get to the fourth topic. And then I looked up again, and it's been 30 minutes. So I was like, all right, enough of that. So thank you once again for coming on. We appreciate I cannot say how much I appreciate this. This is wonderful. Thank you very much.
It is absolutely my pleasure. And, this topic was one I knew we would go long on, because I have so much I can talk about the eclipse. And we do need to, at some point, come back and talk more about the specifics of this particular eclipse.
We will do that
as we get closer.
We have a year, so we will do that. The eclipse will come again, and we'll get you all prepared. This is your, what do they say? This is the place to be for your eclipse preparations, is right here at the Buff. So between now and then, I'll remind everybody to seek the good, be the good, and spread the good, and enjoy the adventure of life.